Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be sharing my April wrap-up. Alright guys, so as you can hear, my voice is almost completely back, which is so exciting. So I took a 2-week break from filming, and honestly, this feels kind of weird. It has been so long since I took that long of a gap between filming content. I typically film every Saturday, so yeah, it might take me a little while to get back into the swing of this, but I'm so relieved to have a voice back. Now, April, I read so many amazing reads. I mostly read fantasy romance. I kind of went on like a fantasy romance binge for April, but there are a couple of contemporary romance that I'll talk about at the end of this video. So if you're looking for a certain genre, definitely use those timestamps down below. Now, if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's talk about all the books I read in April. Alright guys, so starting off with my Patreon book club pick for April. So if you're unfamiliar with my Patreon, every month my patrons get to vote on a new fantasy romance book to read, and then we buddy read it, and then we have a live show discussing the book at the beginning of the following month. So this month, my patrons selected The Crimson Moth or Heartless Hunter as their book. This is a YA fantasy romance involving a witch and a witch hunter. Now, this book has two titles. I have seen it as Heartless Hunter on Instagram. However, my copy says The Crimson Moth. So just know it is the same exact book. But anyway, this story is following Rune, and in Rune's community, witches used to rule the humans. There were 3 witch queens that ended up abusing their power and were assassinated. So now humans pretty much rule, and they hunt witches. So one of our main characters is actually a witch hunter. Now, Rune is a witch, however, she's been hiding this from everybody besides a few select friends, and that is because she's actually a witch vigilante. So she has been known as the Crimson Moth, and she actually tries to save witches before they are caught and killed. Now, Rune's best friend does know that she is a witch, however, he tries to protect her, which is very difficult because his brother is like one of the most notorious witch hunters there is. So Rune decides that she is going to try to get information from her best friend's brother Gideon, and it's kind of like their romance. I will say with this book, I wasn't expecting the romance to be quite so forward in the plot. A lot of this really is the romance without it being spicy. I wish there was a little bit more world building, and the magic system is very unique, but it took me a while to like get into it. But overall, I did enjoy this, and I'm very excited to see what happens in the sequel. I really hope in the next book we get to explore the world and the politics a little bit more. But overall, this was a very solid read. And also taking place on my Patreon is the Throne of Glass read-along. So we are up to Heir of Fire. And I gotta be honest, I completely forgot the majority of what goes down in this book. I thought a lot of the characters that we're introduced to in this book, we actually aren't introduced to until Queen of Shadows. So I was very excited. I love this book. We are introduced to a certain character who is going to be a big player in the rest of the series, and I just love him so much. I actually just did a live show yesterday with Tori from Novel Life where we essentially just gushed about how much we love one certain relationship in this story. But if you're unfamiliar with Throne of Glass, it is very hard to summarize the series without giving away spoilers. But my like blanket synopsis is we are following Selena Sardathian, and she is this assassin who has been captured, and after leaving Endover, which is almost like a slave encampment, she is taken to this kingdom where she is forced to do these gladiator type trials to try to be like the best assassin. And while doing this, she is trying to uncover mysteries of the castle along with some of her friends. And the story goes from there. But don't let that synopsis put you off. I swear, this is one of the best fantasy romance series I've ever read. It has the perfect amount of action, romance, world building. It is just so unbelievably good. And I know that a lot of people say this is their least favorite series by SJM, but honestly, now that I'm doing a reread, it might be my favorite. Like, I love A Court of Mist and Fury, but this book, there's just so much going on, and the side characters are phenomenal, and it's an amazing series. So please, if you have not read this series yet, please try it out. Like I said, I am hosting a read-along on my Patreon. We're up to Heir of Fire, but these are very easy reads, so you can binge them and get caught up super quickly. But anyway, I'm so excited to reread the next book in the series, and it should be a really good time. And next up, we have Glow of the Everflame by Penn. This is the second book in the Kindred's Cursed Saga series. Now, I've already talked about this series ad nauseum on my Bookstagram and in videos, so I'm not really going to go in depth. But the first book, Spark of the Everflame, is following Diem, and she lives in a world where there are descended, and the descended are descended from God. So they're super powerful, and they're essentially the ruling class. Now, the humans feel like they kind of got the short end of the stick, so there's a bunch of human rebels that are trying to take down the descended. Now, our main character, Diem's mother, is actually a healer, so she's allowed to go into the descended territory, and Diem is also kind of learning how to be a healer as well, which grants her that privilege to go amongst the descended. Now, Diem's mother ends up going missing, and Diem decides that she is going to try to figure out what happened to her. And while doing so, she finds out that her boyfriend is actually part of this rebel human organization, and she also finds out that her mother might have been keeping some secrets from her with the descended. So it's really just Diem trying to navigate what side of this battle and war she wants to be on, while there is a budding romance happening. Now, I will say, the first book, Spark of the Everflame, was okay. It wasn't a standout read, but you need that first book to experience this second book, which honestly is almost at a Court of Mist and Fury level for me. I loved this second book. It is the most slow burn of slow burn romances, but also so addicting, and it's just, I was obsessed with this book when I first read it. I do want to do a reread because the third audiobook, it's already released in physical form, but the audiobook for Heat of the Everflame is releasing in like 2 weeks from when I'm filming this video, and I am so excited. I'm a little nervous because I know a lot of my friends rated it lower than this book, but still, I'm obsessed with this relationship, so I cannot wait to pick up that audio. And next up, we have The Everking by L.J. Andrews. This was another probably top read, fantasy romance read so far of the year. And the best way I can pitch this is if you have read the Shatter Me series, think Aaron Warner, but give him some pirate swagger, and that is the main guy in this. And I was obsessed. Any sort of hero that uses love as like a pet name in both anger and in intimate moments, I love so much. So I read this book, I think in like one sitting, maybe two, and it was so good. We're following this girl that lives a pretty idealistic life with her family. Her family is royal, and she knows that there is this prince on the other side of this like realm, but he's been barred off. Well, something happens and he is able to get free, and he steals this girl and takes him to like the other side of this realm. And he also is like kind of like a pirate. So like they're on board a ship, things like that. They go into the Ever, which is like under the ocean, and it's their romance. So he's essentially trying to use this girl to get revenge on her family, but their romance was so good. Also, this has sirens, mermaids, all of that. So I feel like this is the perfect time to read this book as we are starting to get into those summer months. And it was just such a fun and unique read. I am a little bummed because I didn't finish the series that's the companion series to this. So I feel like if I had finished that series, I probably would have enjoyed this just a little bit more. But you could definitely read this book without reading that other series. Like I said, I didn't finish it, and I still adored this book. So highly recommend. And the next two are dark fantasy romances. So first up, we have How Does It Feel? This book is wild. Just know that going in. There was a point where I was reading this and I was like, what the F am I reading? I thought about DNFing. However, the ending of this book might be one of the best endings I've ever read. It is unbelievably rare for me to be completely caught off guard by an ending, and that happened with this book. So honestly, when I was reading this, I was like, maybe this is going to be like a 2-star, and it jumped up to like 4.75. There is still one character that I'm like, I don't know how or why this character exists, but besides that, and I'll elaborate further, but overall, I think if you're considering trying out this book, definitely give it a try, because it's a time. But we're following this woman who, when she was younger, she believed that she saw a fairy. And because of this, she's kind of become obsessed with like winged creatures. And when she grows up, she becomes, I forget exactly the name of it, but she's trying to discover this moth that is kind of going endangered. So she moves to this area where there is a certain mushroom that grows that she knows these moths are attracted to. So she's out looking for this moth one day with like one of these people that she meets in the town, and she gets sucked into the Unseelie Court. So when she gets to the Unseelie Court, right away she realizes she's kind of out of her element because she is almost killed multiple times by the prince of the Unseelie Court. Now, at one point he puts her in a dungeon with a very interesting type creature that is into some very interesting type things. And if you read this book, you'll know what I'm talking about. That part is when I was almost done with this book. However, I am happy I kept going because, like I said, it does get really, really good. Now, this feels kind of like a mix of Fortuna Sworn. Like, there are parts of this that really, really remind me of that series, but also feels pretty unique. And yeah, I ended up really enjoying it. So if you read this because of this recommendation, please let me know what you end up rating it. I've actually told a couple of my friends, or like told them they should probably pick this up, and they really liked it. However, I understand if it's not for you. I totally get why. But overall, just know it is a dark fantasy romance, so definitely check trigger warnings. But it was a really, really unique and fun time. And next up is actually a book that I picked up because of you guys. So I was talking in one of my videos of how I love dark fantasy romance, and if you guys could leave me recs, and someone suggested Feathers So Vicious by Liv Zander. It's the first book in a dark fantasy romance duet. And I ended up picking up this book the same day you left that comment, and I binged it. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. Just know, check trigger warnings. Liv Zander is notorious for writing books that make me uncomfortable, and the beginning of this book was no different. So we are following this girl that lives in a world where there are ravens, and these ravens are actually magical beings that are seen as evil by the humans in this community. However, it is very hard to tell who is a raven and who isn't. The only way to really do this is by torture, which is very unfortunate, kind of like the witch trials, because if you end up torturing a human and you torture them to death, it turns out that, yay, they weren't a raven, but you accidentally killed this person. So that is kind of the world that our main character is living in, but she ends up being captured by two ravens that are trying to use her to get back someone, or get back a raven that was stolen from their community. And the story goes from there. But like I said, very, very dark. I also only read the first book in this duet, so I'm not sure if this is a love triangle or why choose. Someone let me know down in the comments below if you've read this, because I'm very curious, because it might change the way I see this first book, depending if it's Why Choose or Love Triangle. But either way, this was a very dark and unique and fun read, so highly recommend. And moving into dark romance, I only have one book, and it is Fractured Souls. And this is book 6 in the Perfectly Imperfect Mafia Romance series, another series that I just cannot stop talking about. Now, I enjoyed this book. However, I will say I normally pitch the Perfectly Imperfect series as Mafia Romance Light. Most of the books, or all of the books, have someone either with a chronic illness or a disability rep, and typically they're not very dark. This book is dark. This is definitely the darkest in the series. We are following this girl who ends up being tricked into trafficking, and she spends almost a year in this situation, and it is horrible. And although it's not described in a lot of detail, it is described in enough detail to be very upsetting, because it is a very upsetting thing. So anyway, she is able to escape, and she escapes into the arms of Pavel, who is a stranger. However, he's very high up in the mafia, and he ends up taking care of our main character because she ends up having but she ends up having PTSD from this ordeal where she really doesn't want to leave her home. She's afraid of crowds. She's afraid of being found, and she doesn't even want to see her family because she is ashamed of what happened to her. So it's really Pavel trying to help our main character. I think it's Avia. It starts with an A. I should look. Asia. Try to heal from everything that's been done to her. And it was such a beautiful story. One of the characters, or Asia, ends up using music to kind of help cope. She plays the piano. And it was just, I loved their romance. And I loved how Pavel treated Asia with such care and really tries to help her. And he has no reason to do this. He does not know this girl. He just understands she's suffering. And it was such a good story. I cannot wait for book 7 to come out on audio. Most of these books, I believe, have been released in physical format, but the audiobooks are just taking a while to come out. So the day the audiobooks release, I just binge these books. They're very short reads. So I believe the next one is coming out in early June, and I am just counting down the days. And moving into contemporary romance, I feel like everybody was reading Wild Love by Elsie Silver, and originally I wasn't going to pick this up. However, I decided I loved this cover, and everyone was raving about it, so I wanted to give it a shot. And honestly, I love this book. The banter was amazing. I really enjoy Elsie Silver's writing. I've talked about this before, but I read her cowboy romances, and the first book, Flawless, I was not a fan of at all, and I almost didn't go back to the series, but then I read Heartless, and that was one of my favorite reads of the year. It was so good. Single dad, nanny, and just amazing. So then I ended up loving the rest of the series. So I'm very happy I picked this up. I will continue reading books in this series. I just feel like Elsie Silver's writing is just so fun and humorous, and it's just really, really enjoyable and easy to read. So we are following in this book Ford, and Ford is a billionaire. And at the beginning of this book, we find out that he's actually a father. He had no idea. And this 12-year-old girl shows up and is like, hey, you're my dad, and my home life isn't great. So he ends up taking care of her, and around the same time, Rosie, his best friend's younger sister, moves back into town, and he ends up hiring her for this company that he is starting, so they now have to work together, and there is so much verbal sparring that goes on between the two of them, and I found myself laughing throughout most of this book, mostly with the teenage daughter, because she had some great one-liners, and I was cracking up. But overall, I loved their romance, and like I said, this had the perfect mix of emotion and spice and humor, and it was just such a fun read, so highly, highly recommend. And last up was one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and although I really enjoyed it, I gave it 4.5 stars. It is my least favorite in the entire series, which is a little bit of a bummer, and that is Taming 7, and this is the 5th book in the Boys of Tommen series. So, let's get into this. This story is following Claire and Gypsy. I love Gypsy. He was one of my favorite characters in the first 2 books. If you're unfamiliar with the Boys of Tommen series as a whole, it is a YA series, and we're following this group of teenagers that are going to the Tommen University. But we're really centered around this one family. So the first book, Binding 13, is following Shannon and Johnny. Shannon is the daughter in this family that just has a very tough life. The father is an alcoholic and verbally and physically abusive, and the mother is just very passive and kind of allowing the father to do these things. Now, there are reasons why this is happening, but that's kind of the overall gist. And they have a lot of kids, and these kids are just trying to get by. So after some relentless bullying, Shannon ends up moving to Tommen University, where on her first day, she ends up getting knocked out by a rugby ball, and standing over her is Johnny Kavanaugh. And the first 2 books are their romance. The second 2 books, the second grouping of books, so Redeeming 6 and Saving 6, are Joey and Aoife's story, Joey being Shannon's brother. And this one, or these 2 books, deal with addiction, and they are just 2 of my favorite books of all time. Redeeming 6 is going to be my favorite book of the year. Like, I can't see any book coming close to beating it. That book is just phenomenal. It's so, so good. So this is Taming 7, and this is following Claire and Gypsy. Gypsy being Johnny from the first 2 books' best friend. Now, Gypsy has lost his father and his sister in an accident, so he's been raised by his mother and stepfather, and then he also lived with his stepfather's son, so not related, but like they kind of grew up in the same house. There is a decent age gap. And Claire is just this walking ball of sunshine who has always really loved Gypsy. So really most of this book is just Gypsy fighting to not really be in a real relationship with Claire because he's afraid of hurting her and doesn't want to ruin their relationship. And honestly, I was kind of annoyed and frustrated with Gypsy in terms of why he didn't want to just let Claire in, but also I do understand there's so many things going on with Gypsy, and definitely check trigger warnings. This book dealt with very, very upsetting and tough topics that I honestly wasn't expecting. However, I do feel like this book had a different feel than the first 4. Now, I believe this book was picked up by, this is the first book she wrote not indie published. I believe this is the first one that was traditionally published. And I could kind of tell, I've talked about with other friends, that this book just didn't feel quite the same. It did still have an emotional gut punch. I just wanted a little bit more. Also, for this book being a standalone and not 2 books like all the other couples, it's so short. So just to give you an idea, I don't have them behind me, but most of the books in the Boys of Tommen series are very, very chunky, and there's normally 2 books per couple. So the fact that this is the entire couple story and it's this tiny was very upsetting. But overall, like I said, I still love their romance. I still love Gypsy so much. And this book did make me love him even more, honestly, when you find out everything he's had to go through. And I am excited to continue because this book ends on a very interesting ending that I did not see coming. So anyway, I will definitely be reading the next book in the Boys of Tommen series when it releases, and I highly, highly recommend the audiobook. This is set in Ireland, and the narrators just do a fantastic job. All right, guys, those are all the books I read in April. Please let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the books I mentioned. And I want to say a huge thank you to my Paladin Protectors over on Patreon, Amanda, Leslie, Erin, and Kat. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel and being active in the Discord. You guys rock. And also anyone who has watched this video. So I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.